Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Wellness Matters talk this evening, entitled, Oh No, the Teenage Years Approach. My kids are already well into their teenage years, so I won't give any spoilers. But it sounds like Cynthia is going to. I could have used this sooner, but maybe there's still.
You
I'm
still might get something.
I'm sure, actually, even as it's coming out of my mouth, I will find lots of tips that are very relevant to me. Well, it's so nice to have all of you with us this evening. My name is Nicole Ingrand, and I'm the owner and director of River's Edge Counseling Center. And this talk tonight is part of our Wellness Matters series. We have many of these Wellness Matters talks already recorded on our website on the blog page. So you're welcome to check out the others and also to check out any upcoming talks we have. We have also an amazing winter spring lineup. The next one in 2024, early in January, is sex therapy, what it is and how it can help, with Karen Kirkpatrick. We also have with Nicholas Renault in February, boundary setting, how and where to draw your lines. We have a talk on systemic and cultural fat phobia. We have a couple of in-person talks also coming up. We limit them to only 30 participants, so sign up soon if you're interested. One is on the journey to becoming a step family, celebrating the joys and navigating the challenges along the way, and another one on cultural influences on mental health. Also one called Pregnancy to Postpartum and Navigating Parenthood with a child on the autism spectrum, one on OCD. So all kinds of great talks coming up. Also, you may be aware that we rolled out new programs and groups, workshops that we are offering at the center this fall. They were really successful, and we are just finalizing dates for winter and spring offerings for those too. So check out our website under the program page to sign up soon for any of those. I am going to introduce our speaker this evening, Cynthia Smith. Cynthia sees counseling as a supportive place in which to safely explore and process experiences and all of the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that go with them. She believes that everyone has the capacity to be strong and resilient, and that everyone has an innate ability to grow and heal and overcome their scars and struggles, but sometimes people need support and guidance to find these qualities within themselves. And so Cynthia's role as a counselor is to offer support and guidance in uncovering these qualities and in experiencing the growth and change that her clients desire. Cynthia is a registered psychologist, and she has experience and training in providing counseling to children, teens, adults, and families. Cynthia has a wealth of experience, more than 15 years working in a variety of contexts with school-age kids, teens, and their families, including not-for-profit, detox and addictions, and school settings. Cynthia has been with River's Edge how many years now, Cynthia? Just trying to.
It'd be about 4 years now.
Yeah, I was thinking a while, and we're so fortunate to have her. Her counseling approach, Cynthia always tailors that to what her clients need, so it's a good fit for them. And she draws on a lot of strength-based methods. Her approach is person-centered, but also she draws from solution-focused therapy, CBT, and mindfulness-based. She has a strong passion working with kids and families, and when she works with kids, she uses a play therapy approach. And I can definitely attest to that. I love walking down the halls when Cynthia's working with a kiddo, because you can hear lots of activity inside and play and laughter and noise. Good work is being done. We can always tell. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Cynthia. I'm going to be looking at the chat if anybody needs any technical help. Near the end of the hour, if we have some time, we'll look at the chat, answer any questions that you have, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Nicole. And I'm going to just share my screen now. Okay. Oh, goodness. Okay. There we go. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm just got to move things out of the way so I can actually share my slides. Okay. So welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. I love talking about the teenage brain and teenagers. They are pretty amazing. I've actually worked with teenagers now. I calculated it that it's like 22 or 23 years, and in different settings, from group homes to detox facilities to correctional centers and to correctional programs, to community programs, and now as a registered psychologist. I've met a lot of amazing, amazing teens. They are interesting and fascinating, but I think they often kind of get a bad rap. So I'm hoping that out of this tonight, you'll kind of get some ideas, different outlook on things, because I know going into the teenage years, it can be very scary for a lot of parents, but it can also be a time of amazement. And that's what I hope you guys get out of this. I hope that some of you parents did convince your teenagers to come to this as well. And I say, if you didn't, when you get the recording of this, I strongly encourage you to watch it again with your teenagers, just so that they also have that understanding of what is going on with their brains and bodies and all of that kind of stuff. And hopefully I'll give you some ideas at the end to kind of help things just make a little bit more smooth into these teenage years. I already did that one. Sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Okay. So during the teenage years, there are many changes that do take place, and some of these changes are often overlooked. So we often focus on the puberty and hormonal changes that can happen, but these changes are actually not only physiological, they're also psychological as well as social and emotional. So not only do those hormone changes in puberty affect the physical sense, there's a lot of impacts that kind of go throughout our systems. Changes in growth and sex hormones have impacts on both the brain and the body. Just a fun fact, the term teenager was actually not coined until the 1930s. And prior to that, kind of those teenage years were considered either childhood or adulthood with nothing in between. So that's just kind of an interesting distinction that we now make that wasn't once made. And that just says how much research has come since the 1930s. So within these areas of change, there are often areas that parents hear about that cause some feelings of dread in them. And these just include that expression of more and stronger emotions, unpredictable mood swings, risky behaviors, poor decisions, and impulsive decisions. And yes, all of these things do happen in the teenage years, but being aware that these things will happen is often just a good first step in getting through these years. And again, I'm going to give you guys some ideas at the end that will hopefully kind of make all of these things seem a little bit more manageable and not quite so scary. So as I mentioned, it can, there's a lot of these areas that bring on that fear and dread, but there can also be a lot of amazing areas. And these really just include that, there's such an amazing time of great learning that takes place in the teenage years. It's a time of exceptional plasticity where the brain can remodel itself in response to the environment. And the teenage being is able to adapt and be resilient in those times. It's a time of amazing growth, and this growth is in a lot of different areas, which we're going to be touching on. And watching this growth where they're taking in so much of the world can be very inspiring, and it also can be very like you kind of get on this, I missed that, right? You see the world in a different way as a teenager. It's also a time of building and developing the things a teen loves and is passionate about. As teens become more passionate about things, this can lead to an increase in talents in those different areas. So I'm getting a bit nerdy tonight. So you guys are all going to see my nerdy side because I find the teenage brain, again, is super fascinating. But it's also really interesting. And I'm going to share a lot of things that I find interesting here. So just some interesting brain facts. At birth, an infant's brain weighs 300 to 400 grams, which is a fourth the size of adults. So you're already a quarter of the way to being developed when you are born. By the time a child is 6 years old, their brain is about 90 to 95% of adult size. So it's almost actually fully developed by the time you're 6 years old, size-wise. And at birth, a newborn's brain has almost all of the neurons or nerve cells it will ever have. There are a few neurons in the cerebellum that will form in the first 18 months of life, but for more or less, the brain has everything it needs in order to grow and become an adult brain. So another interesting fact, though, is that while the brain is almost adult size by adolescence, it is actually only about 80% developed. And the last section to develop is the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is responsible for cognitive processes such as reasoning, development, planning, and judgment, which is where we get those dread aspects of things. And this is really important to note that that is the last area of the brain to be developed. And not only is brain development happening during adolescence, but the brain is also undergoing a process of remodeling. And this remodeling actually continues into adulthood, with some research stating that it continues into the mid-20s. And there's actually some research coming out that's talking about it possibly being into their 30s. So if you kind of think about our expectations on teenagers, we expect them to be an adult by 18. But their brain is actually not fully developed, possibly until their 30s. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that remodeling as well. So remember that when a child is born, they have almost all the neurons they will ever have. And just a kind of a reminder as what a neuron is our basic makeup of our brain. It is what fires for us to have thought processes, all that kind of stuff. So at birth, the number of synapses per neuron is 2,500. And by age 2 or 3, it is about 15,000 synapses per neuron. And so I'm going to be talking a bit more about this on the next slide, but just a couple of other things to know is that the neural network expands exponentially or quite rapidly from birth, and then it slows down a little bit. And every experience actually excites the neural circuits. And again, I'm going to be kind of doing some diagrams and stuff that are going to demonstrate this. And this is going to be my super awesome drawing to explain this. And I'm gonna just try to share a different screen if I can figure out how to do that. So bear with me for a moment. Okay. So again, just that reminder that, at birth, the number of synapses per neuron is 2,500, but by age 2 or 3, it's about 15,000. So how I'm going to kind of demonstrate this is this again, my super awesome drawing. Okay, so if we kind of picture this as kind of a neuron, and we start kind of developing some synapses with every action that is kind of taken by an infant. So if you kind of think about, they learn to, pick something up, it creates a synapse. Starts creating those neural pathways. They pick something else up, it creates another one. Something else, it creates another one. Something else, it creates another one. And it can even be similar objects. So say they pick up a red crayon, they pick up a blue crayon, they pick up a purple crayon, they pick up a purple car, they pick up a red car. So you keep creating all of these synapses. So if you kind of think of that, everything that a child does creates these neural synapses. By the time a child is 2 years old, they have developed millions of these. And if this process were to continue, by the time a child reaches adulthood, they could have 1 billion synapses. And the brain would not be able to sustain that. It would actually get overworked. Things would be missed. People aren't really quite sure what exactly would happen, but the brain isn't really able to sustain that. And because of this, the brain decides instead to go through a process of pruning. And this starts at the age of 2, and it really ramps up into adulthood. And so think of you are pruning a tree, and you're just cutting off branches. Things are being taken out. And again, this process starts kind of at the back of the brain and ends in the front. And this, you might kind of notice that something your teen can do one day, the next day they can't do anymore. Maybe this was them putting away their backpack every day. And a lot of parents find that it's like one day something is, they've done something every day for, 2 years, and then suddenly that is gone. And it really actually is gone because it's probably something that has been pruned out. And the other part to kind of think about for teens too is like, you guys actually probably feel very confused at times at that. It's like mom and dad are getting mad at me for something that, like, I know I can do this. And chances are there's something that's been pruned away that is kind of leading to that. Now, the other part of restructuring the teenage brain is a process of remodeling. And this is really where connections are just strengthened. And there's the drawing. And so these connections just become bigger and better. They go through a process called myelination, where neurons are basically wrapped and protected. And so this actually allows for different areas of the brain to become connected. So so say this was picking up a blue car and this was picking up a red car. These actually might kind of connect with each other. And so then these things become a little bit easier in a way. And this remodeling also allows for faster information processing and the increased conduction of electrical impulses. And that's important to note because as we kind of know that, kids and teenagers, they might take a little bit longer to think about through things, how to do things. This remodeling helps all of that process become faster as they move into adulthood. So, as I mentioned, pruning begins at the back of the brain and ends in the front. And the prefrontal cortex is what is remodeled last. A reminder that this prefrontal cortex is in the frontal lobe and is responsible for decision making, planning, problem solving, thinking about consequences of actions, and controlling impulses. And again, this might not be complete until mid-20s, possibly 30s. Okay, and I'm going to go back to sharing my slideshow. Hope you enjoyed my super awesome drawing. Okay, so this is just another kind of image of just the development of all those synapses. So as you can see, when a baby is still in your utero, it's actually very similar to kind of the newborn look of when they are born. So they're born with all those synapses and neurons already. And then at 3 months, you can see it's getting a bit busier. 6 months, even busier. 2 years, it's very, very busy. And so imagine that if you kept going by adulthood, we would just be looking at blackness there. And it actually might not function very well. It wouldn't be quick at processing things, processing information, events, that kind of stuff. And so then that pruning starts at age 2. And as you can see in the images on the 4 years and the 6 years, things are starting to thin out, which is what we kind of want to have happen. So a little bit of a summary. So the teenage brain is under construction. It undergoes a process of pruning, which starts around age 2 and really ramps up in adolescence. And I kind of stress that because we're going to be talking a little bit more about how that kind of impacts adolescence coming up. And then it goes through that process of remodeling, which lasts into adulthood, with that last part being remodeled, the prefrontal cortex. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the difference between teens versus adults. And it's a really just important distinction to think about. So if you kind of think adults, their prefrontal cortex is developed and they are thinking with their prefrontal cortex, which is the brain's rational part of the brain. And this is the part of the brain that responds to situations with good judgment and awareness of long-term consequences. Because the prefrontal cortex is still developing, teens really rely and process information with the amygdala. Now, they use the amygdala to make decisions and solve problems, but this is an emotional part of the brain and is associated with impulses, aggressiveness, and instinctive behavior. The amygdala is also the hub for our strong emotions, including anger and fear. And if you're familiar with anxiety and our survival response, the amygdala is the hub for our fight, flight, freeze response and can kick in very quickly and very automatically. So when you kind of think about if teenagers are thinking with their amygdala, there's a lot of factors kind of at play there. They're going to be a little bit more impulsive. They might be a little bit more on the aggressive side. They might be feeling versus thinking. And we're going to talk more about that as well. And in the teenage brain, the connections between the emotional part of the brain and the decision-making center are really still developing and not always at the same rate. So that emotional part might come under control and that decision-making part might not at the same time. And that's why teens often have overwhelming emotional input coming. So big feelings will come out around a lot of things. And they actually can't explain what they were thinking later. So you might ask your kid, like, what were you thinking when that happened? And your teenager might honestly tell you, I don't know, because they actually felt more than they thought, right? And they actually might not even totally remember everything that happened because they are feeling it versus thinking it. And another just important kind of thing to note is that, like parents, you might notice that sometimes your child's thinking and behavior seems quite mature, and at other times their thinking or behavior might seem like illogical, impulsive, or emotional. And teens, you might notice that sometimes you say things without thinking, or you do things without thinking first. And it's really the back to front development of the brain that explains all that. So some other things to note about the teenage brain is that there is a correlation between the brain's reward centers and riskier behaviors. And these reward centers of the brains have a lot of sway over decision making and behavior than the executive control ones. And this heightened reward sensitivity may prime teens to take more risks, but it also motivates them to get out in the world and learn new skills that they need to become successful adults. And that is important to kind of note too, because a lot of times that is what draws teenagers to say their friends doing maybe risky behaviors too, is that there's a thrill to it, and that thrill can be a bigger reward for them. The amygdala, again, which is what teens are using to think, is also responsible for learning through rewards and punishment. And if you think through about the amygdala and the fear response, punishment might not be a way to go, as it actually elicits a fear response. And the fight, flight, freeze might kick in. And so then you get this avoidance from your teenagers instead of them actually understanding that, there was a consequence to their action. The other kind of thing to note too is that teens are also really sensitive to social and emotional information. The amygdala is responsible for social communication and understanding as well, including how you interpret someone's intentions from how they talk or act. And again, keep in mind that there are feelings mixed in there, and these social cues are being interpreted by feeling versus thinking. The amygdala also handles and uses implicit or unconscious memory. And this is the memory that allows us to do certain things without remembering them. So riding a bike, tying shoes, that kind of stuff. So again, when you kind of think about those learned behaviors that your teenager has maybe done for years on end, the amygdala kicking in actually makes them forget some of that. And finally, stress has an impact on the teenage brain as well. And much of society thinks that teens have it easy these days, and in some ways they really do, right? They have information at the tips of their fingers. They, have access to a lot of things that other generations didn't. Like, I kind of go back to, the term teenager wasn't coined in the 1930s. I couldn't imagine a 1930s teenager. They probably didn't have access to a lot of things, even just different clothing and style and that kind of stuff. So they really have it a little bit easier in some ways. They didn't go through things like Great Depression, World Wars, things like that. They don't have to walk uphill to school both ways in -30 in the snow. But there are many more stressors these days that other generations didn't have to deal with. There's different standards for things like clothing, engagement in social media. Um, you're being exposed to information and news all the time. And these all contribute to different kind of stress that maybe we as parents didn't experience ourselves. And so that's just important to keep in mind that that exposure kind of thing can and kind of be have an impact too. I'm gonna give some tips on that coming up. Okay. Um, so I'm gonna be bringing up a video clip. If you're not familiar with Dan Siegel, he is an amazing author who writes about the brain. He's very well known in his field. And if you've never read any of his books, they're actually a great starting point. He has one called The Whole Brain Child, which really focuses on kind of younger kids. But it really gives a great explanation as to like the emotional part of the brain and how all that kind of plays in. And he has another book called Brainstorm, The Power and Purpose of the Teenage Brain, which again, would not hesitate to recommend either of his books if you are a book reader. His books are also really quite simple to read. So yeah, highly recommend them. I am going to stop sharing and share in another way once again. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, guys.
Adolescent period is absolutely amazing. People often give it a negative approach, saying, oh, it's a time where adolescents are going to lose their mind, or they're just immature, or raging hormones drive them crazy. These are all not only wrong, but they're myths that mislead us and actually disempower us. Whether we're adults or adolescents, they actually give us the wrong message and they make it so there's nothing we can do. So, what is actually the truth? The truth is that instead of raging hormones, what's happening is we have remodeling in the brain in ways we never could have predicted. We now understand two big things are happening in the brain, things you as an adult can support adolescents in developing well. And if you're an adolescent, you actually can use this to help your brain grow in an optimal way. What are those two things? The brain is pruning itself. So imagine that in childhood, you're growing like a tree in a step.
Publishing a book has never been
Sorry.
easier. Marketing a book has
Having
never
a
been
short ad
more
commercial break.
If you're thinking about publishing a book and selling that book, you are in the right place.
Establishing all these branches and all these leaves are growing in the brain. That means connections among the basic cell, the neuron, called synapses, are being established, and you're soaking in the knowledge of the world, and that's beautiful. The tree is just growing, growing, growing. But then what happens that surprised everyone is the brain begins to prune itself. You start carving away some of those leaves, some of the smaller branches, even some of the larger branches. And the reason for the pruning is to specialize the brain. While the child is developing in ways that are really generalized, learning everything they can about everything they can, an adolescent is going to begin to find their passion, to actually find things they like, things they really love doing, and to drive their development in that way. So pruning is actually a use it or lose it principle underneath it. That if you don't use something, you're going to lose it. So if you like sports or like dancing or like music, do those things so you continue to establish those circuits. The second thing that happens in the remodeling adolescent brain is myelin formation. Myelin is a healthy sheath that allows connected neurons to communicate with each other in a much more effective way. How? It's 100 times faster, the signal that's sent down a neuron to communicate with another neuron, 100 times faster, and after it fires off, it's 30 times shorter the resting period that happens. 30 times 100 is 3,000. So when you've put down myelin, you've made your neurons communicate 3,000 times more effectively. That's a great thing. Now, the great thing, too, is that you as an adolescent can actually use the focus of your attention to be aware of your emotions, aware of other people, to be engaging in activities, to be doing things with your thoughts that actually reinforce the parts of your brain you want to hold on to. So the good news about the remodeling story is that a field called neuroplasticity, how the brain responds to experience, shows us that what you do with your mind can change the activity and therefore the structure of your brain. So if you then come up with the statement that the ultimate goal of brain remodeling is to make an integrated brain, to differentiate areas, that's the pruning, and myelinate them, that's the linkage. When you increase differentiation and linkage, you make the brain more integrated. And an integrated brain is the pathway toward well-being. And you can do mind sight exercises. These are exercises that increase insight, empathy, and integration. And if you do them as an adolescent, and you can also do them as an adult, you'll actually increase the integration of your brain as your brain is growing, not just during adolescence, but throughout the lifespan. And what's the outcome of integration? When integration is made visible, it's kindness and compassion. And so what we see through adolescent development is that our relationships become built on connections that are deep and filled with honoring each other's vulnerability, that's kindness, and supporting connections that are compassionate, filled with a sense of caring about other people and wanting to help them. This is the kind of world we can build as we move through life and support each other in our development.
Yeah, again, Dan Siegel, great researcher and author on brain development. So if you've never checked out any of his other work, he has all sorts, he has TED Talks, he has everything. So I'm gonna move into, there we go, talking more about kind of like practical things to kind of try. Dan Siegel talked about mindset in his video. I mean, basically that is a lot of what I'm going to kind of touch on. I just don't call it that sort of idea. But we're going to talk about how to build a healthy teenage brain. So we kind of need 3 areas covered in order to build a healthy teenage brain. We need to encourage positive behavior, promote good thinking skills, and help your teen get plenty of sleep. And I'm going to break each of these down and hopefully give you guys some things to try. So things to encourage positive behavior. Taking healthy risks. Healthy risks are, your teens are going to take risks. We might as well give them some areas to actually take some healthy risks. So healthy risks would be anything that brings excitement. So it can be something as simple as going on roller coasters. It can be sports, it can be trying new activities, trying new things, going new places. So just keep in mind, encourage those positive behaviors by helping your child take healthy risks. Explore new and creative outlets for the expression of feelings. A lot of teens really find it helpful to find an outlet for feelings because their feelings can be big and overwhelming and really, really strong, and they don't know what to do with them. So finding a creative way for that expression would be great. Things like sports, music, art, any of those kind of things can really be an outlet for feelings. Offer praise and positive rewards. A lot of times parents are like, oh, my kid doesn't want anything to do with me as a teenager, but I promise you they really, really do. And praise and positive rewards doesn't have to be anything big, but just those good jobs, let's go celebrate, even minor accomplishments, things like that can really go a long way. And especially kind of going back to that idea of like rewards versus punishment. Again, you might not get very far if you're using kind of more the consequences punishment line of things with teens, because it can activate that fear response. Be a positive role model yourselves. They're going to learn from you. So whatever you don't want your child doing, don't do yourself. And I think that's kind of a given statement, but I'm just going to reinforce that one a little bit. And just reminders of resilience and competence. Remind your teens that they're resilient and that they're competent. Because they're so focused on in the moment, adolescents have trouble seeing that they can play a part in changing bad situations. It can be helpful to remind them of times in the past that they thought would be devastating but turned out to be the best. So for instance, maybe your teen is having troubles or conflict with a friend. Remind them of times in the past that that has happened and how it turned out and how they resolved that conflict. Some things to promote good thinking. Okay, so parents, first of all, don't shy away from the hard topics. Talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I know it can be really hard to have these conversations with your kids, but if you don't, they're going to get that information from somewhere else. And the other sources, chances are going to be their peers who are going through the same crazy teenage brain stuff. Keep in mind that teens need to be able to speak their mind in order to process information. So your teen might say or think about things differently than you, and it might seem like they're arguing with you, but these arguments can be more about asserting their independence and processing information than it actually is about defiance. So the other kind of thing I always like to do, if you find these conversations hard to have, try doing something as you talk, right? To take your kid for a drive, go for a walk, make tea. That can really help. A lot of teens actually just don't like making eye contact. And I mean, a lot of people don't like making eye contact, but teenagers are kind of especially known for that. So do something as you talk. That can be really, really helpful. I gotta be honest, I talk about a lot of different topics with a lot of people, and a lot of times kind of saying a joke or something like that to take the edge off can really be helpful. So even something like, so sex, what is that about, right? And just take the edge off of it a little bit. Even just saying out loud that you're uncomfortable talking about this, and it's like, as a parent, I don't know if I have all the answers, but let's talk. This is kind of really awkward for me too. And you'll find that once you start having these conversations, it gets easier. I actually like games, and again, I do come from a play therapy point of view with kids and teens a lot too. But I actually think that these are games that can be really, really helpful. So games like Would You Rather or What Would You Do If gets your kids thinking and talking about different options and choices. And this can help your child develop decision-making and problem-solving skills. Just make sure you provide your own explanation for things to get the conversation moving. So an example of a what would you do or what if scenario would just be something like, what would you do if you were at a party and saw someone spiking someone else's drink? Get your teen to kind of think about what their answer would be. What would they do? It can be really hard to be in those situations, and being prepared for that problem solving and already having a plan of action can be really, really helpful. And then as a parent, follow-up questions, right? Would you confront the person who's spiking the drink? What if you didn't know either person? Would it matter? So kind of getting them to think about things like that. An example of a would you rather question, you can pull hundreds and hundreds off the internet. You could also come up with your own. I have a favorite would you rather question that I use with a lot of people, and I'm actually going to give you guys a question. Take a moment to think about your answer, talk about it if you're with someone else. And then I'm going to give you my explanation as to which one I would go with. So my would you rather question is, would you rather not be able to bend your elbows or bend your knees? Like I have you enough time to at least think about it. Now, a lot of people answer the question that they would rather be able to not bend their knees so they could keep walking and things like that. I actually have the other answer, that I would not bend my elbows because, okay, I'm sitting here going, I don't know if you can see me very well in that little tiny screen, but it's like I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't wash myself, and I couldn't use the toilet by myself. And I'm like, I do not want to go there. I could handle probably walking straight legged, but I could not handle someone doing all those things for me. So give your explanation to your kids as you ask these questions too. And it's interesting because a lot of people, when you hear someone else's explanation, is like, I never thought of that. So play those games. It can be a really fun around the dinner table conversation, or like around the Christmas dinner table conversation could be a little bit fun to get all the family involved, get lots of different answers, could be a lot of a great time. Now, rewinding. I love this concept and I love giving this to parents and teenagers to use. And it can be really, really helpful. Okay. So I want you to think about rewinding something, right? You're watching a show, you missed something, you rewind it backwards. That is exactly this concept, is that we are taking a moment to rewind to a better point in the conversation and starting from there again. So in those moments, say when your teen says something that was maybe said without thinking or filtering it first, you're going to cue them to rewind and give them a do-over. And teens, you can also do this. So there might be moments where you realize that maybe you said something without thinking, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that, but I'm not going to let mom and dad know that I said that and I feel bad about it. You're going to just say, let me rewind that, and give yourself a chance to go back to a better point in time and rewind it. Now, why this is really a nice thing to do is because it catches us in those not so good thinking moments and gives us a chance to have good thinking in that exact moment. So please try that tool. It is really, really great. And like I said, parents, you can use it, and teens, you can also use it. I always kind of say though, if we let our teens do something, that we can also do it too as parents, because as parents, we also say and do things in the heat of moments and things like that. And sometimes we also can get a do-over. So parents, keep in mind that as well. Okay. Promoting good sleep. Teenage sleep again. I'm like getting my nerd out here for you guys. So sleep is really important to all of us. It's actually quite important to teenagers though, and I'm going to kind of explain that why as I go. So the American Academy of Sleep Medicine has recommended that children ages 6 to 12 get 9 to 12 hours of sleep a night, or within a 24-hour period, and teenagers 13 to 18 get 8 to 10 hours a night. And so teens, I want you to think about whether you're getting that or not on the average night. There might be the odd night, like maybe there's a late hockey practice, or maybe you were out later with friends because there was a birthday party or something like that. But on average, are you getting those 8 to 10 hours of sleep? Now, teens will also go through a period where they might sleep even more than that, close to 12 to 13 hours a night. And this is actually a normal phase, and just marks some jumps in the pruning and remodeling that has happened. There's no set time for that to happen or anything like that, but you might notice that your teen is really easily able to sleep till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, even though they that's hour 13 for them. Chances are they're going through that phase. It's not a super long phase, but it does happen. So just be aware of that. And I mean, a lot of times parents are like, you're wasting your day, but it's like, they're actually not. They're actually remodeling and pruning their brains during that time. Research is showing us that electronics of all kinds need to be turned off an hour before we want to be asleep. And this is the same for children, teens, and adults, that it really is that electronic devices emit that blue light, and that actually tricks the adolescent brain into thinking it should be awake and ready for action. And the dynamic social exchanges that can occur on social media can also make it harder for adolescents to fall asleep long after they do turn off their devices. They're sitting and thinking about things. They're thinking of how it all went down, who said what, and what they could have said differently, or what so-and-so should have said differently. So really turning off that device off before bedtime is super important. Just an interesting research fact, that adolescents who spend the most time on social media have twice the risk of disturbed sleep than those who spend less time on social media. So sometimes limiting that, especially when you're finding that disturbed sleep is a thing, I would definitely look at the amount of social media that is happening. And we need to be aware of our circadian rhythm. And I always say that word wrong, but my husband kept correcting me on how to say it. So I think I said it right this time. And I'm going to talk more about that right away. Okay, so not getting up in the morning, is it human biology or attitude when it comes to a teen? It actually is about human biology for teens. It is about interesting kind of, again, getting my nerd out here. A teen's inability to get out of bed before 8 a.m. is a matter of human biology. The sleep patterns of a teenage brain are different from those of younger children and adults. As a teenage body goes through puberty, its rhythm essentially shifts 3 hours backwards from what it was. So if you kind of think, maybe as a child, they were settling for bed at 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock becomes 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock then. And due to the biology of human development for teens, the secretion of melatonin begins at 10:45 at night and continues to actually be pumped out until 8 a.m. And why this is important to know is that as adults, our melatonin production actually stops way, way before 8 a.m. So we are able to get up in the morning. Whereas teenagers, like I said, it is still in their system at 8 o'clock in the morning. So essentially, the sleep mechanisms in teens does not allow the brain to naturally awake before about 8 a.m. And the adolescent body does not begin to feel sleepy until about 10:45 a.m. So when you kind of think like, yeah, as a teenager, I totally stayed up past my parents all the time. And it is because of this human biology aspect. Your teen honestly cannot get to sleep. Let's talk about why sleep is important though. So sleep deprivation itself is considered when a teen is getting less than 8 hours a night. Sleep deprivation itself actually impacts use of cigarettes, drugs, and alcohol. The incidence of depression and anxiety among teens rises with less sleep, and it can also increase emotional reactivity and impulsiveness, and feelings of sadness and hopelessness increase as well. If you're really getting into sleep deprivation, an interesting research statistic is that those feelings of sadness and hopelessness increase from 19% up to nearly 52% in teens who sleep less than 4 hours a night. So that's pretty significant. Other things that sleep impacts is teen car crashes. And teen car crashes are the leading cause of death for teenagers. And that increases, that declines significantly when they are able to obtain more than that 8 hours of sleep a night. Chronic sleep deprivation diminishes the brain's ability to learn new information and can lead to emotional issues like depression and aggression. And less sleep has also been linked to lower academic achievement. So again, sleep so important. The amount of sleep an adolescent gets, the quality of that sleep, and the consistency of nightly sleep all affect brain functioning in regions crucial for self-control, learning, emotional reactivity, and reward processing. So please encourage sleep, not only in yourselves, but in your teens as well. A few other things to note and to keep in mind is stay connected with your teen. A lot of times teens, kind of shut out their parents through the teenage years, stuff like that, but really try to stay connected. Keep an eye on their activities, their friends, go to games and practices, have your kids' friends over, offer pizza, those kind of things. That's going to really help you stay connected. And keep asking questions, right? I know you're probably going to get shut out sometimes, but still ask questions. Again, those would you rather questions can be quite fun. Throw them off guard a little bit with a random silly question, could be a lot of fun. Encourage empathy. Learn about your teens' interests, encourage these. So yeah, I know it can be really hard when our teens have an interest that we don't. But take a moment sometimes and learn about what they're doing. Doesn't mean you have to get into that interest, but even just knowing. I know I work with a lot of kids who like Pokemon. I do not understand Pokemon, and this is kids, not so much teens, but Pokemon is really confusing to me, and it's not something I can learn, but I will still take the time to, hey, you like Pokemon, like, what's your best card or things like that. So it doesn't have to be anything major. I'm not learning how to play Pokemon because I'm going to be honest, I just don't think I'm capable of that. So yeah, and encourage these by, if your teenager has an interest, offer them a ride somewhere that they can explore that interest. So yeah, learn about your teen's interest and encourage these. Encourage empathy. Talk about feelings, yours, your teens, other people's. Teens pick up a lot of information. They're watching a lot of stuff. So even like, say you guys are out somewhere and you notice something, it can be really helpful to talk about feelings in those settings. Maybe you notice someone else being very emotional, that it's like, oh, like that was kind of interesting. That was uncomfortable for me. How did you feel about that situation? So yeah, encourage that empathy piece. And finally, ask your teen if they need help problem solving or just need you to listen. This is really, really important because as parents, we really want to solve our kids' problems. We don't want our kids to struggle and suffer, but teens often need a place to just talk and get things out. Sometimes they might need help to problem solve, but they actually need to talk and get things out before they can go to problem solving. That problem solving piece can really only come after that it's all out. And you'll often find that as your teen talks things out, they've actually worked things out for themselves. But it can be really just helpful. Like if your teen has come to you with a problem, just be like, okay, are we problem solving this together or you just need me to listen? And teens will tell you what they need if you ask. Okay. And this is just my reference list. So I'm going to stop sharing. I hope you guys all got something out of that and got a few ideas. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the teenage years. I really love, to be honest, I love working with teenagers. They are so amazing. And I've met so many amazing teenagers on my journey through life, and they are inspiring.
That was amazing, Cynthia. So
Thank
much
you.
information. And you did make it feel like an adventure.
It's a great adventure though. And it's, oh my God. Yeah. And it's funny. I think as parents, you get these anxious feelings about going into the teenage years. And then you have this experience, and I hope every parent experiences this eventually, that it's like, oh my God, that is so cool that my teen thought of that.
Yes.
And yeah, I hope every parent kind of experiences that, because it really is an amazing thing when you first realize just how amazing that teenage brain is.